Good afternoon, welcome. My name is Julie Shields-Rutina, and I'm the Director of College Planning, Education, and Training at MEFA. And you are here today listening to this webinar on college admissions that is part of the MEFA Institute. So I'll give you a few logistics. You will have the ability to change the volume up or down right there on your computer. If you need to have closed captioning, you can hit the CC button for live transcript on the bottom and see the words that we are speaking. And if you have questions, and we think you probably will, and we hope you will, please put them in the question and answer section, and we will try to get to those and answer your questions. I'll just say a couple of more words about the MEFA Institute. It is MEFA's professional development program for school counselors and others who help students. And you can earn professional development points by attending these webinars and looking at the full lessons. So please come back often. MEFA Institute, MEFA.org/MEFA Institute. And you can see all of the offerings that we have for you and to help your students. And today, we're so fortunate to have with us Drew Carter. And Drew is the Deputy Director of Admissions at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. And he has a lot to share about the college admissions process and a lot of wisdom as well. I always learn something from listening to Drew's thoughts about this process and about this transition from high school to college. So thank you, Drew. Welcome.
Thanks, Julie. It's great to be here on such a rainy, dreary day. It's nice to be inside on our computers for once. Not certainly for once over the last couple of years, but it's great to be sharing some thoughts and working with MEFA today to talk about the college search and admissions process. These are some of the topics we'll talk about today. We'll talk about some of the current trends. We'll talk about students building college lists and visits to campus. We'll certainly talk about the application process, and Julie will share some thoughts on financial aid and some of the MEFA free resources. Let's talk a little bit about some of the trends that we're seeing right now regionally, but also nationwide in the college search process. We're certainly seeing students start the process earlier. As they start to think about possible destinations for college, as they start to think about types of schools, we're seeing this thought process start earlier, not just with the students, but most especially with the parents. And this, used to happen, maybe at the start of senior year. Now it's certainly happening at the start of junior year, if not earlier in some communities. Students are certainly applying to a greater number of schools. The Common Application has made that easy. Colleges giving out fee waivers has helped to encourage students to apply. Demonstrated interest is increasingly a factor in college admissions. It can be a little tough to figure out which schools track demonstrated interest and which schools don't, but it is certainly still possible in the pandemic world, and if not in some ways easier through students' engagement virtually in schools, programming, and through their websites. Parents are certainly still a part of the process. Parents are very, very involved, not only in researching schools, but in helping students select which schools to look at. And I think sometimes they can be certainly over-involved. Anyone who works with students probably understands that. Social media plays a big role, especially in the ways in which students are learning about colleges. Very often now they're bypassing the traditional school's website and going right to the school's social media outlets to look to find authentic student voices so that they can learn about the college. And cost is certainly in the conversation more now than it ever has been before. We've certainly seen the cost of higher education increasing, but also that we've seen an increased role in colleges looking to discount cost and a little more competitive negotiations when it comes to considering different schools' options. MEFA is certainly a great resource, and certainly thinking about staying organized is one of the things that they've always recommended. Right, Julie?
No, that's great. And I mean, we have this application manager online, but we stole this idea from parents who we've met and who have brought spreadsheets to us and shown us all the ways they stay organized with this process. But feel free to download this or just create your own system to keep you organized, whatever that may be.
And I think, you know, one of the more important parts of this, number one, is like keeping a sense of what the financial aid deadlines are. Certainly keeping a sense of whether or not schools have supplementary essays. I think that sort of tends to creep up on students a little bit, particularly if they haven't researched supplementary essays in their deadlines early in the timeline. As we get closer to November 15th and November 1st, I think there's a lot of students right now realizing they have a lot of additional essays to write. So this sort of spreadsheet organization would help students be aware of those requirements. Here's some research in colleges, some resources. There's so much great information online right now. At the same time, there's a lot of bad information online right now. It is sort of tough for students to know, but typically nonprofits and government websites usually are the best resources. Here's just a few things, a few factors to consider for students as they start to begin to make their list, as they start to consider some of the factors. You know, size and location tend to be the first starting points in conversations with students. Academic fit is certainly a factor to consider. That can be more difficult for a student to identify. Campus culture, that tends to be whether or not there's Greek life or whether students live on campus or off campus. Learning style, whether a student really learns best in a smaller environment, certainly something for them to think about. Obviously, affordability is a big part of the conversation, and hopefully families are working that into the conversation sooner rather than later. Study abroad programs are certainly something to consider. Most schools offer pretty successful and competitive study abroad programs these days. Intended area of major is a difficult conversation sometimes to have with high school students, particularly early in the timeline. They may not yet know what they want to study, and that's certainly fine. I think we often encourage students just to say, I don't know, if that's the authentic answer. And social climate. I mean, I think, you know, an introverted kid might be looking for a different sort of college environment than a real extrovert might be looking. Some kids are really looking for a huge environment in which they can sort of thrive at being an extrovert and getting a sense of so many different kinds of communities within a larger community. Other students are looking for, frankly, just the opposite. You know, this is something I'm always pushing with families. Is I think sometimes families go into the idea, especially the college search process, with the idea that every visit to a college has to be formal, that it has to be run through the admissions office. And the truth is, I think very often, informal visits can be, in some ways, sometimes just as valuable and certainly more efficient. I'm often encouraging families to say, like, listen, there are certainly important visits that you do where you schedule it ahead of time, where you take a campus tour, maybe do an information session, something like that. But there should be opportunities to visit colleges when you're on the way home from grandma's house and you see a sign on the highway that says this college, that exit, and you just pull off and you pull onto campus and you get out and you walk around for 10 minutes. Sometimes those quick off the cuff informal visits have less pressure associated with them, less weight to them, and can help to make the college search process a little more fun for the student. So I think it's important to have a balance of formal and informal, but I think families really need to be open to informal and also recognize the value there. When students kind of go into an informal visit like that, lots of times they have no preconceived notions. They're a little more open to possibilities. And they should be open to the value in those influences. College fairs. College fairs are returning after a year in hiatus with virtual tours. Some college fairs are returning in person this fall and certainly moving forward into the spring. Some are still staying virtual. College fairs are a great opportunity for students to talk to a wide variety of schools. They tend to be kind of surface conversations with college representatives or alumni representatives who are staffing the college fair. But it is really an invaluable opportunity to speak to particularly colleges not from the area, and to see such a wide variety in one place. Those are really available. The virtual fairs are good. They're not great. I think both from the student side and the college side, they certainly do not replicate what the in-person college fair is like. The sort of the browsing aspect of an in-person college fair is just not available in a virtual college fair, but it's better than nothing, and it's much safer right now than some of the in-person college fairs. Right, as we start to have this conversation about creating this list, tends to be so much pressure involved with sort of creating this list. But it's important for a student to have balance on the list, and balance can come in many ways, right? We can have, traditionally, we think of balance on a student's college application list as being about admissibility, having some schools on the list where the student has a reasonable chance of being accepted, some schools where it's like more in the middle, and then some schools maybe just out of reach, that might be a little less likely to be admitted. At the same time, we have to relook at that list and think about financial balance. How many of these schools are going to be sort of financially very reasonable for that family? How many might be sort of in the target range? And is there one or two schools on that list that might be just out of range about when it's compared to what the family's willing to spend on college? Now, those dollar figures aren't always exactly known because cost can change depending upon acceptance and financial aid award and merit scholarships from time to time. But it is an important conversation because if a student applies to 8 schools and they are all out of reach academically and they are all reaches financially, that's not a very successful process. And frankly, 8 isn't enough if all of those 8 are going to be reaches financially and in terms of admission. So it's important to think about balance to the list, first as far as admissions is concerned, and then as far as finances are concerned. So having the financial list to the balance, I think, is equally as important. So, where a student applies is a great conversation for the student to have with their family, and certainly at times to include their counselor. Which application to submit to a particular college is a really a great conversation to have with the student's counselor. There are so many different kinds of applications, right? Regular decision to early action and early decision. Some schools do rolling decision, and certainly other schools are doing open admission. By my experience, students tend to want to do what's easiest. Early action is very popular because it's earlier and they find out earlier. But early action isn't always the right option for every student. Sometimes students can strengthen their application by having an impressive fall during their senior year academically, by having another standardized test score under their belt. And so in some cases, it might be better for the student to be applying a regular decision. That sort of nuanced decision is a really important angle for the counselor to play, because students don't always have that understanding of how their particular application might fit into the pool at that school that year, in whether it's early action or regular decision. So that is a great time for counselors to insert themselves in the conversation, not always where the student's applying, but which applications the student might be submitting. Obviously, some applications, especially the early ones, may not always require fall grades, may not always give the opportunity for, say, a November test date for scores to be part of the application. In some cases, they would, but that's an important consideration for families to make when they're thinking about which application to submit to which individual college. Oh boy, so lots of forms. Here's the part that students, their eyes tend to glaze over a little bit at, but certainly the common application is most commonly known by most families. Coalition application is increasing in popularity and increasing in use. And certainly there's lots of different requirements or even optional items that a student might submit as a part of their application. Certainly the application in academic pieces like the transcript and testing, Some schools are going to require recommendations. Some may just require one from either a teacher or a counselor. Some might require multiple recommendations from both a teacher and a counselor. Essays are certainly can be a big part of the application process. And then there's a lot of most likely optional portions with interviews, whether they're evaluative or informational, auditions and portfolios. If the student is either sometimes applying to an art school, but sometimes not, lots of schools will still consider art portfolios as a part of the student's application, whether or not it's an art school or not. So sometimes that's an optional piece. Very often, though, several of these pieces for the application might have different deadlines. Interviews might have different deadlines than the application deadline. Auditions and portfolio submissions might have different deadlines as well. So that's really important to remind students to keep track of the deadlines, not just for the application, not just for the financial aid documents, but any other pieces of the application, like interviews and portfolios and auditions. You know, boy, this is, you know, as I say often in my talk, this is the cake right here, whether or not the student is prepared academically. You know, working in college admissions can seem so complicated, but when you boil it down, what we do most often is to take information from the past and to predict future performance. It's not exactly like being an NFL scout. It's not exactly like being you know, a broker on Wall Street, but there are some similarities there. We gather as much information from the student's past as we can, and from that we try to predict future performance. When it comes to academics, colleges are going to take a close look at the setting in which the student has been studying. Their school, the courses that have been made available to them, the level of courses that have been made available to them, the choices that the student made with regards to level of courses and individual coursework, certainly the grades that the student has earned in the classroom over the course of 3.25 or 3.5 years. Standardized testing, when available, can be a part of the conversation as well. And we know certainly that the state colleges here in Massachusetts work on the sliding scale, and there's great resources available online so that colleges can publish, particularly state schools can publish how the sliding scale works, and students and families and counselors are certainly free and encouraged to use that as a resource. I don't work at a state school, but I've looked at the sliding scale more than a few times so that I can help have conversations with students and with counselors. Standardized testing has never played a smaller role nationally than it does right now, but it still can play a role personally for an individual student when they choose to apply to college. You know, so many schools now are test optional, certainly more than ever before. A great majority of them are doing it as a 1 to 3 year pilot. But standardized testing will never return to the prominence that it enjoyed pre-pandemic. I'm still encouraging students to test when possible and when safe, so that they can make the choice about whether or not they're going to include standardized testing in their application. There are some schools that are not test optional. And they're very sort of public about that. And it's important to understand that while most schools are optional for this cycle or the next cycle, there are still a small number of schools that aren't optional. And you know, I think the hardest thing with standardized testing is that students see it as a measure of their academic merit or worth. That's not how colleges see it, particularly now in the test optional world. It's also important to understand that making standardized testing optional, which it is now at most schools, that has not removed the anxiety around standardized testing. Students still feel a great deal of anxiety about testing. They still feel a great deal of anxiety about whether or not they should send their scores or not. Standardized testing going optional did not remove anxiety. In some ways, it just added another layer of anxiety. Now students aren't sure about whether or not they should send their scores or not. So counseling students with regards to whether or not to use scores as a part of their application process is important, because the answer might be different from one school to the next. Certainly how a student is involved outside of the classroom can be a part of the conversation when we look at an application. Getting a sense of not just who they are, but the choices they've made in their free time. I will say that it's important to know that colleges want to see what kids have done in the free time. We don't necessarily have feelings about which things are better than other things. I don't think that a job at CVS is better than being a part of student government, and I don't think being in student government is better than a job at CVS. I think all activities are enriching and help us learn about who the student has been at the high school level and who they might be at the college level. It's important for students to be able to organize their activity list and maybe compose a resume. In a lot of ways, it really just helps them understand about the things that they've been doing. Sometimes in interviews, students forget the things they've been involved with. We in the college world find value with many more things than students think. Family responsibilities, particularly during the pandemic, have been at an all-time high. And I've always encouraged students to share that information, babysitting younger siblings or younger family members, helping out parents around the house or with family or business responsibilities. These are a part of their experience, and I certainly think they are worthy of being listed on an application. The essay is another great source of student anxiety. At the same time, it's an opportunity for students to really develop and showcase the power of their voice. Students spend a lot of time thinking about what they think we in the admissions world want them to write about. And the truth is, we in the admissions world don't care what they write their essay about. Nobody cares. We read great essays every year on stupid topics, and we read bad essays on what the guidebook says is a great topic. Inevitably, students will write the best essay on the topic they want to write, not the topic they think they should write about, and not the topic their older cousin wrote about when he or she got into Tufts, and not the topic that their mother thinks they should write about. They will write the best essay on the topic they want to write about. And understand that so much of the anxiety behind the essay comes from the reality is that they've spent their entire academic career writing essays for a really well-known audience. They write essays for their English teacher. And their English teacher, they see every day. They get to know their English teacher well. Their English teacher explains an assignment in depth, answers their questions about an assignment. The student has an ability to anticipate that English teacher's expectations, to anticipate their reaction, and then all of a sudden, during their senior year of high school, they write what many think is the most important essay of their high school career or college, and they write it for a complete stranger. And this person doesn't explain their expectations. They don't explain the assignment. They don't know who this person is. So much of that anxiety comes from the anonymity of that reader. The reality is that we in the admissions world will always favorably receive an essay that a student has really found value in, that a student has found mojo in, that a student has found fun in. Our reaction tends to mirror the student's sensation in writing that essay. My best advice for students is always to write the essay on the topic they want to write about, because if they want to write about it, we want to read about it. I don't think there are good topics and bad topics. I only think there are topics that students want to write about, don't want to write about, and think they should write about. Here's the Common App essay prompts. I think the way to get misled with this, I think students so often think that this is their assignment, to read these and to choose one. The truth is, I think these are just, frankly, there as inspiration for students who are struggling to come up with an essay topic on their own. These topics are confusing, comma-filled, and a little bit frustrating to high school students sometimes. So I think the beginning of the essay brainstorming process should be done without the prompts. We in the admissions world don't necessarily care what prompt they're answering. I don't remember ever noticing what prompted a student was answering when they wrote the essay. That is a recommendation. Obviously, the most important thing when a student chooses someone to write a recommendation is that the person knows that student well. That's always the most important. Not what that person's title is, not what grade that teacher may have given the student. Most important thing is how well they know that student. Asking early, obviously, is always encouraged. Asking nicely, I always encourage students to ask nicely. I always encourage students to thank the recommender once they've agreed to write the recommendation. Because if you thank that teacher or counselor for writing your recommendation, typically that recommender will write about how thoughtful that student is and gracious. So certainly encouraging students to ask the right way, to ask in a timely way, and to choose wisely when asking a person to write a recommendation are the most important parts of the recommendation. Interviews, it's a great way for a student to develop their voice in the admissions process. It's a great way for students to have a voice, to bring their two-dimensional application into 3D, or put differently, to put bring their black and white application into color. I work at a school where 1 minute I'll read an application that doesn't have an interview, and the next minute I'll read an application that does have an interview. And the depth at which I know that student is so different when there's an interview present. It's a great way for students to control something in the process that they control. They get to learn about the college by asking questions at the end. They get to demonstrate the characteristics that they feel like they can bring to that college. And it's important for students to understand that they won't be asked questions to which they don't already know the answer, because the questions are about them. And not just about them, but the questions are about the things they talk about every day. Their friends and their family, their high school and their hometown, their clubs and their classes, their hopes for college, their dreams for college, their questions about college. It's kind of literally the dialogue students are having every day. And if they can have that dialogue with an admissions representative, just might help them get into college. The exciting time when decisions start to come out. Certainly, there's a lot of different options. Students can be admitted. They certainly can be deferred from an early application into a regular round. Students can be denied, not accepted. Waitlist is certainly a more increasingly popular option for colleges to utilize now. More colleges are enrolling students off the waitlist than they did in prior years. So waitlist doesn't necessarily have to mean that college is not going to be an option for that student. May 1st is the national deposit deadline. People worked around that May 1st deadline with the pandemic in 2020. But it is always a good idea for students to keep their eye on that May 1st deadline so that they can secure a spot at a school at which they've been accepted. Cost is certainly a big part of the conversation. And it's a big part of what I lean to Julie to talk about, as she's the expert in affordability.
Sure, thanks, Drew. And I'll just mention too that this is just a little bit about cost and affordability and financial aid. MEFA actually has lots of webinars that are 100% on that topic. So I would encourage you to watch one of those as well. But just some ways that you can help your students and their families think about this early on is to, as they're doing that research of colleges, they should definitely take a look at what is the cost of attendance, and then what is the net price, what are families actually paying. So they can get some of that information on those same websites where they do research that talk about sort of the average financial aid offer that's awarded, and sometimes even the average financial aid offer that's awarded for people in the family's income bracket. So they can just get a little bit of a sense of that. And I will also share about net price calculators. I think they're on the next slide, but that's a way that families can use a calculator to get a sense of what they might actually be paying at that college. Students and families should also just understand what financial aid applications are required and when they need to submit those, which is most of the time the answer is from fall through the winter of senior year of high school. And also good to have a good understanding of need-based aid versus merit-based aid, and which colleges offer which types, and a mix sometimes. And what the different deadlines for financial aid are. And there are ways that students can start looking for private scholarships early on. There are scholarship searches online where students can put in information about themselves and get a list of possible outside scholarships that they could apply to. That could be something online like the Coca-Cola Foundation. That's a large national scholarship. And there are a lot of those, but of course they have a lot of students applying to those. So another thing that students can do is just look closer to home, look at their high school, look in their town, look to any community organizations that they're involved with, parents, employers, things like that, to see if there are any scholarships that they will be able to apply to. And people hear this story over and over. I tell it all the time, but it's just, I think it's a good example that my dentist always had a little card on her reception desk that said that each year she gives 2 scholarships to high school seniors who have been good community servants. And so I had always made that note in my mind to have my own kids look into that when they became seniors in high school. So just keep your eyes open for that type of those type of outside scholarships. And then this is the net price calculators that I mentioned. So every college has a net price calculator on their website. You can type net price calculator into the search bar on a college website, and it will bring you to a calculator that will allow you to put in information as you will on a financial aid form at some point. And it will ask financial questions. It may also ask some academic questions like a student's GPA or possibly a test score, which would indicate maybe that the college has some merit-based aid if they're asking about academics. But either way, then the calculator will then give you an estimate of the type of financial aid offer you might be able to receive at that college. But again, it's an estimate. It's based on what you put into the calculator. And I advise people not to use that as to make hard and fast decisions, but it can be used as a way to help the student create that balanced list that Drew was talking about. If the student tends to be applying to colleges that through use of these net price calculators, they see not a lot of aid is being awarded and may make some of those colleges unaffordable, then it's good to add some colleges that might be a little more affordable to their balanced college list. And then the next slide just shows the forms that the student should be aware of. The main financial aid application is called the FAFSA, and that becomes available October 1st in the fall of the student's senior year. And the truth is that there's really no reason that a student and their family shouldn't sit down soon after that and just get that form done, because the form is always going to be asking financial information from the prior year's tax return that's already done. So for example, students who are completing the FAFSA now are completing it with the 2020 tax return that hopefully was done sometime earlier this year. So there really is no reason to not just jump on it and get this form out of the way. Even if they just add a couple of colleges they're applying to, they can always go back in and add more afterwards. So all colleges require the FAFSA. The CSS profile is another application that not all colleges require, but many do. And many colleges that have a lot of their own scholarship and grant dollars feel that the FAFSA continues to get simpler, which is a good thing, but that it doesn't have all of the information that those colleges need in order to distribute their own scholarship and grant dollars most equitably. So the CSS profile asks more questions to get a better sense of the family's financial picture. And once in a while, you'll see a college may have their own specific institutional financial aid application. So just complete anything that is required and by the deadline. That's the key thing to know about these forms. And it's nice, we talked early on about the cost of education, and it's nice to know that there are some ways to lower the costs and make the costs affordable. And Mass Transfer is a program in Massachusetts. You can go to this website, and that's a program or numerous programs within mass transfer that allow a student to start at a community college and then transfer to a four-year public institution. And in doing so, there are many ways that they can get tuition credits and freezes on tuition and really keep costs down. So it's good to explore that website a little bit. And Tuition Break is another program where students can attend public institutions in the New England states and possibly pay in-state Massachusetts costs for certain programs. So take a look at that list at NEBI also. And if the student is interested in a program that's on that list, that could be a more affordable way to get a college degree in the program that they want. And then I guess I'll leave it back to you with the calendar, Drew.
Yeah, just hear some thoughts about certain markers during the timeline of things students can be thinking about. Certainly in the junior year, the student wants to really start that investigation process, that self-discovery journey of looking at schools, that, determining what their own preferences are going to be, starting to build a sort of a working knowledge of terminology and the variety of options out there. At the same time, like starting to prepare themselves by taking standardized testing, identifying and perhaps even asking teachers to write recommendations for them, and then to start to think about the essay. Sometimes students just need to write one bad draft and get it out of the way. And sometimes students can start that in the spring or the summer after their junior year so that they're better prepared to go forward. Senior year, retaking standardized testing is great. Confirming those letters of recommendations, finishing up that essay, attending as many MEFA webinars as possible, and then starting to get a sense of like timing and timeline. A lot of students I'm meeting with over the last 2 weeks feel really, really stressed about all the details and deadlines they're managing right now. This late October of their senior year is filled with schoolwork and encroaching deadlines for college applications. This seemed to be a lot of the students I talked with over the last 2 weeks really wish they had started some of the applications, some of the supplements, and just some of the details of applying to college. They wish they had started that sooner and not left it to this point in the fall, because academically, this is a really tough time for seniors as well. The winter, there's still going to be ongoing submission of grades to colleges, certainly continue researching scholarships and financial aid materials, making sure your financial aid applications are complete, make sure you submit those admissions applications on time. And then obviously the spring is very exciting. Receiving college acceptances and financial aid awards. Certainly, I think helping to interpret the financial aid award is an important step in that senior spring, and certainly MEFA is a resource there. And then hopefully, possibly revisit programs and visit programs to colleges at which the student's been accepted, so that they're in a good position to make their decision by May 1st.
Oh, yeah, and I'll just mention about MEFA Pathway. MEFA Pathway is a free online portal for students, and anyone can go in and create an account. Just type "I'm a student" there, hit "I'm a student." And it's filled with a lot of resources. There are ways that students can take some assessments and learn about some of their goals, their skills, their interests, which then will lead them into just exploring different careers and different paths to those careers, and then exploring the schooling needed and colleges that have programs that would allow the student to meet those goals. And so it's really about the student learning about themselves at a younger age and building on that knowledge, so they feel good as a junior and a senior about what their next steps should be. There's also a ton of, besides the college search in there, there's financial aid information, scholarship information. So just a tool for students to use. All right. And
here's just some things that students can start now, right? Obviously, like keeping track of the MEFA events and starting to research colleges and starting an introductory list of colleges that should be big and should be ambitious, but should have a sense of admissions and financial balance to it. It's certainly an exciting time, particularly for juniors who are just getting started in the process. And there should be some hope and excitement at this point in the time.
That's great. And these are all ways you can stay connected with MEFA. One thing I mentioned about social media is that we do put a lot of information about those outside scholarships on social media. So that can be helpful. And we did this week, I believe, we've joined Instagram too. So we'll be updating this slide. And you can always call MEFA with questions, email with questions, and we have lots of resources and lots of people that we can turn to, like Drew. So I'll ask, are there any questions? I have not seen a lot of questions. It's, I think, that kind of a stormy afternoon, but if you have questions, we'll give it a minute and you can put them into the question and answer section. And if there are no questions, I guess we wish you a good afternoon and know that you can come back and connect with us another time. Oh, and Drew, thank you so much for all of that information.
Yeah, it was great to be here, and thanks to you for hosting this opportunity and for all the participants. And yeah, I think also know that we in the admissions world at every college are excited to connect with counselors and students. I think that's always been true. I think it's even more so true now after the last 18, 19, 20 months. Connection is important for all of us, and I think increasingly important for us. And I know there's a sort of just even more questions now than there ever have been before about college life, about the financial side, about the admission side, about the academic piece. And I think this is, for many of us in the admissions world and the college world, it's reinforced why we do the job and reinforced how important it is to create connections with those outside of the world of our college.
Thank you. All right. Well, have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Bye, Drew.